Welcome to the Sonic Days podcast, home of all things audio. This season was recorded live at Sonic Days 2024. In this episode, we're diving deep into the world of immersive music production with Eric Horstmann.
Very welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Eric. I work as a business development manager for Genelec, but I also run my own immersive music studio called Immersive Lab in Berlin. And today I wanted to take the opportunity to showcase some of the projects I was working on and go a bit deeper in the session. So talking about workflow, routing, mixing concepts, etc. Because a lot of things that have been discussed are in theory, but this is more the hands-on session. And theory is nice, but what are you doing with that theory? And this is what we're trying to explore today. So the studio where this all happens is this one. That's my own little studio in Berlin called Immersive Lab. It's in the north of Berlin. It's a Dolby Atmos equipped studio, 7.1.4, all with Genelec, obviously. And the whole studio is digital. There's not one analog wire anymore. Everything is Dante or ASEVU. I have mixed more than 1,000 tracks till today and still counting. So I started with this whole thing in 2012 as I was responsible for the first European Dolby Atmos studio for post-production. So that's when I started my relationship with Dolby Atmos, and I'm still in. So let's talk a bit about the mixing concepts for Dolby Atmos. And I'm differentiating in two different concepts, or let's say starting points. So the first starting points, assuming that a stereo mix has already been created or is in the process of being made right now at the moment. So a team is working on it right now, and then they decide, oh, last minute, next week's the release. We also needed an Atmos version, so what do? It's not a big thing, although timing is a big thing, but we can get in touch with the producer and with the artist or with the label, exchange basically PDFs where I have written down exactly how I want the stems to be made, so I can have a smooth process in mixing this also along in Dolby Atmos. But of course, we always have to think that there is a stereo version that is like working as a reference, as a sonic reference for the artist, for the client. So we cannot basically do whatever we want in Dolby Atmos. We have to stay true to the sonic identity that they have crafted in the stereo work. So, but that's not a big deal, and I would say 95% of all the projects are coming that way. So where a stereo version is already been done or in the process of being made. And the other 5, I'll talk a bit later. When you look into catalog projects, or projects that are dated 5 years old, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, then obviously creating those stems is a bit more difficult because there might not be stems. Because even 10 years ago, nobody was thinking about, I need to extract stems because somebody will do something in the future with that. So it gets a bit more complicated. You usually have multitracks, unmixed multitracks, being it already digitized or on tape. So you basically go along and recreate the stereo version first and then create some stems to do Atmos. It's obviously it's also expensive because it takes a lot of time and you have to put in a lot of effort. But the mixing concept that I really prefer is actually when the stereo mix has not yet been created. So let's think about, we talk with customers, with artists, with producers, say, let's start with Atmos first, and then we create out of the Atmos version, the stereo version for your regular distribution channels, for the club. And I actually, as I said, 95% are the first concept and 5%, but growing is actually the second part where people think, oh, it's actually an interesting concept to go Atmos first and then derive the stereo version out of this. What we do basically there is we don't have any sonic reference or stereo reference, so we can do whatever we want, more or less, and we can incorporate the 3D space. So I'm not sure if I can say that it sounds better than the other option, but it definitely sounds different because we take different decisions. We are not kind of restricted to a stereo version on a certain way with a color, with a compression rate, with the reverbs, etc. So we work from the multi-track session. So the raw recordings are used to do the Atmos version first. And then we're creating an Atmos master file of that. And this is the base to do a stereo down mix for the stereo distribution channels. And since the latest version of the Dolby renderer, I think it was 5.3, there is a new downmix mode called Stereo Direct. Because before it was the case that you have to downmix the Atmos mix into a 5.1, and then from 5.1 you were downmixing to stereo. So yes, it worked, but you had a couple of instances in between without full control on the downmix parameters. Now it's different because we have full control on the downmix parameters. Just think about what happens to the top speakers when you create a stereo version. So where do they go with which level? That's basically the biggest challenge or issue also with the surrounds. From Atmos to 5.1, there were parameters that you can dial in how much you want the top speakers to be represented in the 5.1 mix, in the front, in the rear, in the sides, etc. But from 5.1 to stereo, we had no downmix control on certain levels. So it might be the case that the tops were downmixed 3 dB to 5.1 and then another 3 dB to stereo. So 6 dB all along the way. But maybe there is some important content in the top speakers that I need to have present in the stereo mix with, let's say, minus 1.5 dB or something. So that was not possible before, which is possible now. And that changed a lot on the quality of the stereo downmix of an Atmos master. So this is actually now, in my opinion, a fully potential workflow that you can consider as a starting point. Before it was a bit tricky, I understand, but now it works very well. I did a couple of releases with that way, and the artist that I worked for, it's a Spanish electronic music producer, he's not very good in mixing. He's good in producing, but not very good in mixing. So that's why we decided to do that. Okay, give us the multitracks. We start with Atmos, then we do the stereo of this. And he was literally blown away. I've never read such a comment on a mix of mine. Usually you just send it off, and then if you don't hear anything, then people are happy, and then it's good. And then you see it released. So, but in that case, I actually got an email back, which was, wow, interesting. Okay. But those are the different concepts that I'm following here. So what are the challenges and advantages in my subjective view on mixing for Dolby Atmos? I mean, this slide is because I did a presentation in Germany last week. So I start with the challenges and then I come with the advantages. When I travel abroad, I have to switch this usually, but I'm still sorry. But the Germans is always like, yeah. So just talk about bad things and then maybe we'll find one good thing. Anyways, let's talk about this. So one challenge, it's actually a mindset thing. So many music producers heavily rely on the mix bus, the stereo mix bus, where you put 255,684 plugins to create your sound. But in Atmos, it's different. We do have up to 128 channels in the master. So how do you do that now? How do you work with compression, with saturation, with EQ, all these kind of things? It's a challenge for many people. I have an answer to this, but that's definitely in the beginning something like, how am I supposed to do this now? And the second challenge, I think, is actually all these different little devices out there that support Dolby Atmos and need to playback my mix now, being it my iPhone, being it my laptop with the onboard speakers, some virtualization happening, headphones, cars, smart speakers, sound bars, high-end studio and home cinema. So the variation of devices that support this format is limitless, more or less. But in the studio, we have to make sure that the mix somehow translates one way or another to all these little gadgets. So that is definitely a challenge. But let's come to the advantages. So first advantage, in my opinion, is actually we have an increased dynamic reach. So we lost complete generations of kids with Spotify and MP3. They were not able to kind of pronounce dynamic in the correct way. Now we can teach them. It's D, Y, N, etc. So that is definitely a good thing because all mixes, no matter what genre, it can be thrash metal, it can be electronic music, meditation music, classical music. The maximum level that you're allowed to supply or to do is minus 18 dB LUFS, which is rather low in volume. There are some technical reasons for this. Not going to go into too much detail now, but I think it's definitely a good law. And this is not a best practice, this is a very strict law. If you're louder than minus 18, let's say minus 17.9, you'll get a reject, no matter what. They're very strict on this. But I think it helps a lot. Another advantage is, but this is more like with my little Genelec sales hat. I'm sorry for this, but let's say you're setting up your studio that is working for Dolby Atmos today. talking about future formats that are coming, they are most likely using the same placement of speakers, because this speaker placement is not because Dolby thought, maybe let's put a speaker there. It is actually based on proper paperwork from the ITU, etc. We're following some standards. So the placement of the speakers is following standards, and other formats will or might incorporate those standards equally. So equipping your studio today to mix Dolby Atmos, because that's the new kid on the block and that's what's paying the rent of the studio, might allow you also to be ready for future formats that are coming, definitely. And I give you one example. For my studio, I'm working on a project now where I did a German rap artist in Dolby Atmos, and we'll bring him into the stage in next spring in Berlin for a venue of 800-900 people. And it's going to be an L-Acoustics L-ISA system. So in my studio, I can pre-work the whole backing tapes in L-ISA format to use it live on the same speaker layout that I have initially for my Dolby Atmos mix. So it's a good thing. There are definitely formats coming. I'm so sure that this is happening. You see what happens in the last 5 years. This is just exploding. So it's a good thing. But then coming back to all the little gadgets and devices that support Dolby Atmos, as much as it's a challenge that it sounds there, it's a huge benefit. And now finally people can listen to your mix. When we go back 15 years, 20 years, Super Audio CD, DVD audio, 5.1 music, all these kind of advantages. Sonically was all great and fine, but who set it up properly? I mean, we can be happy in a home cinema when the left and right speaker work. That's the reality. And everything else is completely Wild West. So now with Atmos, being it ready on a smartphone, on a tablet, on a car, and anywhere, it totally makes sense now to spread the word. Because, for instance, if the headphone use case would not be in place with Atmos, we would not sit here and talk about this. This would be an academic, nerd talk, but not a proper thing, okay, commercial masses, how to do this talk. So I think as much as it's a challenge, it's also an advantage that people now finally can listen to this mix everywhere. So this is the background. Let's dive into a session. And I brought an album that I mixed in summer. It's good friends of mine in Germany, Grunenberg, the middle artist in the middle of the three. He's very known. He's a signed Universal Music artist. He had some super hits in Germany in 2015, and since then his whole life changed. So he's very prominent, but now he has an own electronic music team with Ole and White Zoo, 2 DJs. And I mixed it in Dolby Atmos, and I wanted to show a bit the session and just give you an idea what I do when I mix. And I'm old. I work in Pro Tools. I have gray hair. Huh?
What do you mean? We all work.
It doesn't matter. The best DAW is the one you know. Period. So this is a fairly slim session. It's not much stuff happening. I have to show this. It's coming later. But I will just hit play, give you an idea about the song. That's the last song on the album. It's not so super heavy electronic, because the rest of the album is pretty like bass house, heavy EDM thing. And this one is a bit more subtle. But let's see.
Call out my name, don't let me float away. I'm ready to take my place. Call out my name, I'm lost in the dark. Why do I feel apart? Call out my name, don't let me float away. I'm ready to take my place. Call out my name, lost in the dark. Why do I feel apart? Call out my name. the dark. Why do I feel apart? Call out my name, don't let me float away. I'm ready to take my place. Call out my name, lost in the dark. Why do I feel apart?
So that's the song. It's not many elements in there, and I think this is one of the challenges. So you get 10 stems, where you do. Of course, it's easy to mix Atmos when you have 200 stems. Yeah? Then you have tons of the instruments. But in this case, I mean, there's not much in there. So basically, then I follow my different concepts. What am I doing with movement or not movement? So what I'm doing. So first of all, you probably have seen it. I don't know how familiar you are with a renderer or with Atmos in general, but I'm not using the bed. So I'm working with object bed. This is not a new thing. This has been developed a couple of years ago, and I copied this and made it adapted to my workflow. The initial idea of using an object bed is actually to bypass also the limitation of the channel width of Pro Tools, which was 7.1.2 for a long time. And basically how you do it, just to have 4 top speakers, or maybe in the 9.1.6 configuration, how do you work with that? So, and that is what I'm doing. My studio is 714, but the template that I'm working in is completely 916. Everything is 916 in my template, because I want the full resolution. The render onto speakers, it's then basically on the playback device. It gets me a little bit more resolution in what I'm doing. So static placement is very simply done in my session over a bus routing. So I do have basically for all the physical locations of a speaker, I have an aux track. So I have an aux track for the front, left, right. I have an aux track for the sides. I have an aux track for the rears, top front, top rears. So I can easily just distribute sounds. Let's say this one, which is the kick drum, the first track, this one. No, I'm not crazily loud now. So I can easily just say, okay, now it's going to the front speakers only, left and right. This one is not in place. Okay, that's fine. But what I usually do, and especially with club music and electronic music, is when you go to the club, you'll experience 2 speakers left and right of the stage, but also 2 in the rear, mostly. I mean, we have quadraphonic mono. There's no way that it's any close to stereophonic, but at least there is energy kind of hitting you from 4 corners. And I try to replicate this, especially with this kind of music as well in Atmos. So I basically just have the same kick drum also coming in the rear by just allowing a different aux track. And with that one, I just increase how much I want from that second position. So that's basically the beauty about the object bed, that everything is in place and I can easily just distribute sounds wherever I want. This is all static. There's no movement right now in this kind of object bed, even though it's objects. But you can also put it to the side surrounds. Gets a bit heavy. And of course, the LFE. So it's fairly simple to just distribute the sound wherever you want. If you want to do the similar thing with a bed track, you have to duplicate the track, pan the duplication to the second location. It works. I'm a bit lazy, so that's my way of doing this. And for moving elements using the regular object, of course, it is still in place. And it finds also its use as maybe this one. This is just a regular object. Yeah. In this case, it's a bit difficult because it's very low end. So it's very low frequency because it's a bass stuff, but still you hear a bit of movement. But that's basically the second step on creating the spatial image. Static object bed, dedicated objects for movement. This third thing that is in place in my sessions is usually for some elements, but very rarely, is upmix. Upmix is a procedure where you basically ingest a stereophonic file or LCR or 5.0 or something, and then you get 714, 916 out. And I'm doing this in this case with a piano at the end. And the plugin that I'm using here is from it's a Swiss guy. Just forgot his name, but I'm in touch with him. I think you can't buy it, but you can ask him to get it. When you have it, you have to reply on feedback, otherwise you're not getting updates. So it's a not commercial product, but it sounds very nice, and it actually goes up to 9.1.6, which is good because all my structure is 916. Some other plugins have a limitation, or let's say a limitation is a bad word, but the new gen Halo upmix works equally good, but it only goes to 714. There are 3 upmix plugins that I use in most of the sessions. That one is the one that I'm using for pianos, for lush pads and stuff that is not so transient. It works very well. And so that's a simple task. It's actually stereo in and then 916 out for that piano. And then you have here the full control, basically on how much you want to have, let's say, all the, basically the level output of the thing. And there's one.
But it's not a bed, it's still an object, or what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes into an object bed, because I have 3 object beds in my session. I'll show you later why. But this has to do with the way how I do mastering in my session. But that goes into a 916 bus, and this bus is going to a second object bed, where I basically pick up everything from multi-channel plugins. Because the object bed, the first one that I showed you, is for static routing of mostly stereo content. Kick drum, snare, clap, bass, whatever. If you consider a vocal, but vocals are treated differently in my session. But yeah, you can place it there on left, right, or on the whites, or on the rears, distributed bit. But if you do upmixing, you need to have a full 916 bus available. Equally, with a third method of creating movement in my sessions is something like Energy Penner. This is like one of my most favorite tools. You probably know it's a Portuguese company, Sound Particles. Crazy stuff. Really nice people, excellent plugins. The Energy Penner in my sessions has a very important role because it helps me to create spatial movement, but a bit more randomized. Because of course you can handle everything manually if you want, but sometimes it's nice just to, in this case, I'm very sorry, but I'm a lazy guy, to click the dice and see what happens. And mostly this is like, oh, that's cool. Okay, save it as a preset, done. And in this case, this is for this element, and it worked nicely. And together with all the rest, it adds a bit of spices to this whole thing. The plugin works like a compressor. So you have the same parameters in a compressor with a threshold, a ratio, attack and release. So what happens is the moment the signal kind of tops the threshold, the whole thing starts to pan. And then, of course, with those parameters. It even has a sidechain input. That could be interesting. For instance, I did it in another song. Let's say every time when the kick drum comes in, that the pad got moved out. Something, you know, that you're triggering movement on a sidechain. And these kind of concepts I really like because it's creating spatial images without reverb, first of all, which is like this to me. But I mean, there is need for reverb, don't get me wrong. But first of all, check what you have in the session to create a nice spatial image before you use reverb. Reverb is really the last thing when nothing works. But I like kind of things that make it like, dynamic. So this is that works very nice. This also exists as a version called Brightness Penner, which is not taking the volume as an input, but basically the pitch. So if you have a sound that is very low and pitching up or something, or sweeping up, and then you define a certain range of pitch where you want to generate movement, crazy. It's really, really interesting stuff. Yeah, so this is basically one of my things that I use a lot. Sometimes, not in this session, but in other sessions, I'm actually combining upmix and the Energy Penner. So first of all, I'm creating an upmix to, let's say, 714, and then I put the Energy Penner to have a 714 slightly moved to create a bit of differences on the channels. It's also phase differences that helps in the downmix process that we're not kind of canceling out too much. Yeah, but these kind of combinations work very nicely in my opinion, but that's something that comes with time. And that's the third method that I'm using for creating movement. And the fourth one is actually a fairly simple one. I haven't used it in this session here, but I can quickly do by just using this little plugin. It's the Dolby Atmos Music Penner. Probably know this one or have heard about this. This is just a regular Atmos Penner plugin that is mainly used with DAWs that are not supporting native panning of Atmos. Ableton, for instance, Bitwig, these kind of things. Reaper, to a certain extent, on Mac, but it's on Mac only. It doesn't work on PC. But the reason why I use this is because it has a step sequencer built in. So we can create panning or movement on BPM, on beat. And especially in this kind of genre, which is 95% of the genre that I'm working in, is electronic music, there's no free beat. It's always 125 BPM, more or less the whole day. And then you can create specific things by just, let's say, let me just create this one. So do the round, don't make it too quick. This is now just showing basically what it does. Yeah, forget about the sound, but it's just showing you what it does. And it's actually also reflected straight to the renderer. I use that very often with stereophonic pads, for instance, that you have a slight movement and it's actually moving around you, but it's never losing the relation of left to right channels. It's always in perfect kind of spatial sync, kind of. Yeah? So because when you make it narrow, then you might lose some information, but you can pan left to right. But in this case, when something is moving around you, but it's keeping the equal distance to each other and the stereophonic picture correctly, that works very nicely. Or you just do things where you go like, you can go crazy and just like, okay, you know what, one here, one there. And it does this then. So first of all, the first one's the round, but then it goes like, okay, I made it very slow here. Let's make it a bit quicker. These kind of things. Huh? And if you do that on beat, that is actually fairly interesting to create panning on BPM. You can do that manually, but it probably takes you a day. This just takes you 5 minutes. So only thing, I don't know if you have experience with this plugin in particular, but one thing, if you want to do an offline export of Pro Tools with that plugin engaged, you won't hear it. The reason why, it's actually Pro Tools in this case works only as a plugin host. So it's just hosting the plugin. But the plugin is taking care of the communication to the renderer and is not aligning with Pro Tools. So what you have to do in this case, if you want to basically incorporate it into your Pro Tools session, you have to put the track in latch mode or write mode, and then you hit play. So now it's actually what it does, it's recording this step sequencer information into Pro Tools automation first. Because at the moment, the automation, Pro Tools doesn't know that there is panning going on. It's just a plugin host. Okay, here's a plugin. I don't know what you are and what you do. So now, in real time, you let it run through. And then there's a menu point that is called Duplicate Dolby Atmos Plugin Automation to Pan Automation. So what it does now, it cannot be reverted. Let me just cancel it, because first I have to put in an object. Because now it actually is copying the plugin automation that was in this panner into Pro Tools automation. So when I have a look now on pan left, for instance, you see here, that's now basically the automation that was previously in the panner plugin, is now living in Pro Tools. The benefit of doing this now is we can do edits. We can cut, we can move, we can extend, we can do radio versions, we can do compilations, whatever. So now it's native Pro Tools automation. The plugin has been deactivated, and now we can also do an offline bounce. So that definitely helps. So that is basically it when it comes to creating movement or spatial image, or however you want to call it. So put stuff in room. You probably just saw when I select an object that in my list here, I have a bunch of objects that are pre-named. So near object, mid object, far object. As you know, in Atmos, we do have the binaural metadata settings that we can set for every object, which is more or less like a distance parameter when it comes to rendering for headphones. And because I work specifically in that genre, but also I try to be very organized with my sessions. So all my sessions have the same settings on every object. It doesn't matter which artist, doesn't matter which album, it doesn't matter. So this song is following basically my principle. I have created kind of food groups. So a group of 20 objects, they are all set to near by default in the session. And now while mixing, I check an element, a file or something, I get a cowbell or whatever element, say, oh yeah, okay, you want to be an object, you go in the near group. Because you have transients, I want to kind of be closer rendered on headphones, you'll go into the near group. Then I come along, see a piano, okay, put it in the mid group, doesn't matter. But that concept allows me, especially with one label that I work for, Mobile Records in Berlin, we're doing a compilation every end of the year. to showcase what has been on the label for the year. It's all Atmos, but it's tons of different artists and records. But we're doing always a compilation where we blend in or do like a DJ mix of those elements. And when I re-import the Atmos mixes into Pro Tools, I know that on, let's say, object 2627, it's always rendered to near, but I don't care about the content, what is on that track. It might be a piano, might be a cowbell, might be a vocal, might be anything. It doesn't matter. But because every session is following the same structure, I can easily just blend. Because if you come along and say in session 1, you decide object 15 needs to be mid, and then in the next session, object 15 needs to be far, good luck. That you can't combine this anymore because it's complete setup. So I have 20 objects with near, 20 objects with near, mid, and a couple of far, a lot of off, actually. A couple of objects are off in my case, and it's mainly vocals. Because electronic music, and especially rap music, when you send out a mix and they approve it on headphones, if you like it or not, and they hear the vocals a bit like in a bathroom, it's not good. Doesn't work. So you'll get a reject. So that's why my vocals are always off. I don't care. It's just the way how it is. Doesn't matter. I mean, we know that we can do more with that, but it's just the client's wish. And also when it comes to my object bed, I also have different binaural settings on the object bed. So my front 5 channels in the front are all set to off. And then I start with the sides. The sides are connected to near. The rear is on mid. And then we have mid, mid, far. So that's basically towards the rear of the room, it gets more distant, kind of, when it comes to headphone binauralization. Dolby binaural. We have to be precise here, because Apple Spatial doesn't care about this. But that's something, yeah.
So you're saying off is closer than near?
Well, off is actually, it's in-head localization.
Oh, okay.
When you put the near mode, it tries to do an externalization, but close. Marcella can tell you everything about this. But that's kind of the approach, that you keep it like in-head localized. Because that's, honestly, as good as we all are with this whole immersive thing, but sometimes we forget to take the artist with us, and it takes a bit longer for them to educate and to kind of handhold into the process of immersive audio. And we all think, yeah, near, mid, far, yeah, great, bam, bam, bam. And then the artist said, where's my vocal? Just basic thing. I can also, the biggest feedback I get when I send out a mix, and then you could think that they start to argue on placement or movement or something. No. Maybe you can do my vocal 1 dB louder. That's the kind of discussion that you have with artists when you talk about Atmos. It has nothing to do with the spatial image. So basically they trust you because they have no clue what it does. So they think, okay, you're the specialist, you know what to place, but my vocal it's a bit louder. Okay, fine. If that's the only thing we need to discuss, I'm happy. But that's what I mean. We can go crazy, but don't forget to bring the artist with us into that technology. But just one thing before I'd like to play another couple of things. My 3 different object beds. So I have one object bed, this is this one, where my energy panner goes in, where my upmix plugin goes in. Everything that is like multi-channel panning kind of stuff, not reverb. Reverb goes extra because I have one object bed, this one, where my effect returns come in. So my multi-channel reverbs, my multi-channel delays, my whatever. The reason why I have splitted this is because the way how I do mastering in my sessions. When I get a stereo mix as a reference, in best case, it is minus 14 or something dB LUFS, but that's not true. Stereo mastering has become a heavy metal sport. So I get stereo mixes at minus 4, where you think, why the hell? But anyways, so it is squashed completely. It's like a big, nice sausage. And then especially in electronic music or techno or stuff, there's no dynamic. But we have to catch up to this. So I have to do a bit of processing to my Atmos mix that it sounds a bit like the master without destroying the dynamics, kind of. But we need this glue effect, we need this compression, a bit of saturation feeling, these kind of things. And now because I work in objects only and not with a bed, and this is another reason why I'm using object beds, but this is more a Pro Tools thing. In Pro Tools, I cannot link 2 channels that have different channel width and use one plugin to kind of control the other. But I can do it when everything is the same width, so stereo. So what I did, I created 59 master tracks in my session They're all stereo. So object bed left, right, object bed wides, object bed sides, object bed rears, and so on and so on and so on. And on all of them, I have the same plugins in the same slots. And the reason why I've done is they are all grouped together, which is a feature from Pro Tools from, I think, 2005, but it's actually now also in music. I used it a lot in post, that when I turn a button here, that it's also turning all the others. So I'm doing mastering on just one of those channels, but it feels like it's stereo mastering, but I know that it's actually replicated on all my 118 objects along. So that is, for the lazy sound engineer, that's exactly what you need to do. This Saturn is a saturation plugin, but I use it in my sessions as an upward compressor. And what I'm doing is I'm using a sidechain, but I'm feeding it with a stereo master that I have in this case. Even though, I mean, you can put a sidechain feed on every individual track to have a bit of kick drum, a bit of snare, a bit of bass. So you decide what you want to have in the sidechain. No, I want to just have the stereo master because that's what people are listening to, so that's the waveform that they're aiming for. I tried, and it actually worked quite nicely. So I'm using the sidechain input, created an envelope follower to trigger the upward dynamics. I have a bit of tape saturation, which is always good, so I'm not getting into trouble with true peaks anymore. My sessions don't have true peaks because I have saturation. It's a very simple way of solving the -1 dB true peak problem. And a little bit of EQ, but I'm actually not using this. Then when it gets dance or rap, I have a little multiband compressor here that is just doing like an internal sidechain ducking. Kind of every time when the kick comes in, the kick is the holy instrument. Don't touch the holy kick. Every time when the kick comes in, it's just a little bit of ducking in this case. And then what came in just, I think, half a year ago in my template is this one. And this is now killing my machine in terms of resources, the GOTS particle. You can see I use it fairly low, but it does something. And the reason why I'm incorporating this plugin is that all the stereo mixes that I get have this baked in anyways. So that's what people know, and that's the sound that they mostly know. So I just replicate it by 59, which is, as I said, killing the power of my machine, but it works and it sounds good.
So just to understand what you're doing, you are mastering on all 128 tracks at the same time.
Yes.
Synchronized.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. That's what you're doing. Yeah.
And that's why I'm using master tracks here. So this is basically, from the signal point of view, it's the last instance before it leaves Pro Tools and reaches the renderer. And the good thing in Pro Tools with the master track that it actually is connected to a physical output. So there I can put a lot of processing before it goes out, but it's not kind of changing the way how my gain staging or whatever works inside my session, where I want some mix techniques baked in that we all know from stereo production. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. I'm a bit more flexible with this, because if I decide, today I don't need the FUB filter limiter, I need, I don't know, an 1176, well, then I put an 1176. It's just plugin based, you know. I can choose whatever I want in terms of plugins anytime and have the full spectrum of the market available in this case. I have precisely chosen these ones, but I could use anytime something else. So go mix. Thanks a lot.